So I started TorqueCars in 2003. I love cars. I like modifying them and tweaking them. And there's really a lot of parts that I'd bought that I hoped would make a big difference to my car. And in reality, they didn't do what I expected them to. So I've packaged all this information and built the site, TorqueCars.com. There's lots of articles on there that detail my experiences with modifying cars and things that I've picked up and learned off other people as I've gone along the way. So the aim very much of this channel and our website is to pass on the best advice to people wanting the most performance from their car. And hopefully you'll avoid a lot of the common pitfalls and problems that people have when they come to upgrade their cars. So this is a short overview video of some of the potential problems and pitfalls that I've flagged up over the years. And there are more detailed videos on each of these topics. So if one catches your eye or you're thinking of a mod and you were hoping it would make a big difference and it actually doesn't, or there's some other nuances you need to be aware of, please check out the videos on our channel and fully inform yourself so you can make wise decisions when it comes to upgrading your car. So we're going to look at the myth that bigger is always better, especially when it comes to car tuning parts. So we're going to discuss quite a few different upgrades in this video and just show why bigger is not always better and just help you to make wise decisions when it comes to buying upgrades for your car. So bigger brakes. Will bigger brakes actually stop the car more effectively? Well, it's certainly true that bigger brake discs and bigger pads will have greater friction, but the limitation is actually with the grip that you get from your tyres. If your tyres don't give you very much grip at all, then no matter how big those brakes are, you are not going to stop any quicker. So it's certainly better to go out and look at better quality rubber and just make sure that you've got better grip and better traction. Big wheels. So big alloy wheels allow low profile tyres and wider tyres, so that's a good thing. Well, no, it's not usually. On the track in the dry, you will get better cornering and better grip from low profile tyres and a wider wheel. But on the roads in wet conditions, that setup is going to perform much worse than your stock setup or slightly narrower wheels with a higher profile tyre. So it's one of the greatest myths that people seem to have, that buying a set of alloy wheels means that you can go bigger and that's automatically going to be an upgrade. The biggest thing that you're failing to take into account usually with that mindset is the fact that these larger alloy wheels carry more weight, and adding those large amounts of unsprung weight to each corner of the car will have a detrimental effect on your car's handling. So if you've got any tips to pass on, let us know in the comments. We really do appreciate your feedback. Please boot that like button because that helps us to get out there. We really do appreciate that. So bigger turbos, surely a bigger turbo makes more power. There are so many subtleties involved. You can't make sweeping statements or even sweeping assumptions, and that is particularly true of turbocharger upgrades. So certainly if you want the big headline power figures, then a big turbo will give you those headline power figures. Now, turbochargers and turbo design has come on a long way over the years, but there is still an element of truth to the fact that large turbos tend to have more lag at the low or bottom end of the RPM range, so they make most of their power at the top end. Where do you want the power band? Do you want all that power at the top end? If you do, a big turbo is probably the route you should go in order to achieve that. But for most people, they want a decent spread of power, particularly at the low RPM range. So in which case there are so many other options than just going for the biggest turbo that you can find. So big exhausts. The idea is to get the exhaust gases out of the engine as quickly as possible. So surely it makes sense to have a really large bore exhaust. Well, that brings me to another thing that you often hear people say, that a car needs a bit of back pressure. Well, it really doesn't. You don't want any pressure at all in your exhaust. You want those gases to exit as fast as possible, and that's the key, getting those gases to exit as fast. So we think about velocity of air traveling into and out of the engine. So with the exhaust, you want that air traveling quickly from the engine, and that will aid the scavenging effect. So as the air blows down the exhaust, it's going to create a bit of a vacuum behind, and the cylinder is going to properly empty, ready for the next charge of air to go into it. But if you've got a large bore exhaust, that all happens much more slowly, and you actually lose some of that scavenging effect. So that's where you start to get a problem where you go large with an exhaust, but you need to think about the velocity of the exhaust. So a well-designed exhaust with no restrictions in it, nice clean bends, no untidy seams along the exhaust itself, will all go a long way to minimizing the turbulence in the exhaust and giving you that nice fast flow. So a lot of people also think that large wings will also benefit the performance of the car, when actually a wing creates a lot of drag. It slows the car up. It's pushing the car down into the road, and it certainly helps to improve grip and its cornering ability. But you've got to ask yourself, are you traveling at speeds that are going to make the use of that extra grip? Or is most of your life spent at much lower speeds, so the spoiler is effectively just adding a lot of drag? And don't confuse wings and spoilers. They're not the same thing. There is a significant difference between them. And we've got another video that goes into aerodynamics and just helps you to get the perfect aerodynamic setup on your tuning project. So big intake, velocity is everything. And having a large intake will actually slow up the incoming air, and you really want that air rushing in, rushing through the valves and rushing into the cylinders. Obviously, if you've got a turbocharger, it's going to help with that. So you certainly want to avoid a restriction in the air intake. So the stock intakes are generally good for modest power increases, but if you've increased the power of your engine significantly, you may well find there's a restriction there in the stock setup, and at that point it's worth investing in a slightly larger bore size on the intake, a slightly larger filter, and that will help you to avoid that restriction and keep your engine flowing nicely. So a big intercooler, surely a large intercooler is going to help cool the intake charge after the turbo's compressed it and heated it up. Well, again, you don't really want a large intercooler because the engine's effectively got to have all of that air pushed through the volume of that chamber, and that can affect the velocity of that air. So there is an optimum size when it comes to choosing an intercooler for your car, and the intercooler itself doesn't add power. All the intercooler does is cools the air charge down, and the larger it is, the longer it will do that before it warms up, and you start getting that phenomenon known as heat soak, where the intercooler itself becomes warm and is less effective at cooling that intake charge down. And also when it comes to power, if you've got a front wheel drive car, there are limits as to how much traction you can get from those front wheels. So you might be aiming at 300 brake horsepower, but when you've actually achieved that on a front wheel drive car, you will find the car very hard to drive because it's difficult to get that power down unless you've got a very expensive differential, extremely grippy tyres and a high grip surface like you would have on your typical drag strip. So think about the practical limits that your car and your setup will create in your tuning project before you go out specifying high power gains and high peak power figures. So big power gains are everything. Well, you look at a dyno graph, and when you go out to buy a remap or a performance part, everyone just quotes the peak power, the highest point in the RPM range, the biggest number that you can get. And actually, you shouldn't really use that to gauge how effective a mod is. What you want is, rather than a spike at one end of the power band, you want the entire power band to be raised, or you certainly want it to be raised in the zone of the RPM range that you're going to be using it the most, and you'll get the maximum benefit. I've seen remaps that only give you a peak power gain of about 10 brake horsepower, but lower down in the RPM range, they make more power than that, and it makes a significant difference to the way the car drives. So don't ever be fooled by large peak power gains. That really is only the tip of the iceberg, quite literally. And then finally, one thing that people often get sucked into is the label that you get on car parts of motorsport use or race spec. Now, in reality, all that means is it's not been tested or approved for road use. The common understanding of that statement, motorsport parts, is that you're buying better quality parts, when in reality, you could well be buying inferior quality parts and rendering your car illegal in most countries, because you can only fit approved parts to your car that have been safety tested for road use. And it would be quite easy to make your car illegal just by buying the wrong parts. So look very carefully and just make sure that your parts are approved for road use. The other thing to bear in mind is that a lot of motorsport parts are designed for the motorsport environment. So brake pads, for example, will need to be quite hot before they reach their optimum operating temperature. So on a road car, the brakes aren't warm most of the time, so you'll just end up with noisy pads that are ineffective at stopping your car. And a lot of other mods are labelled as motorsport mods or stage 3 mods, and they're just not legal to use on the road. So typical things would be anything that removes the pollution controls from your vehicle, a decat or removal of the catalyst in the exhaust. They would all raise the power a little bit, but they would render the car illegal for road use, and you're much better off just going with a performance alternative to many of those different things that are offered. So thanks for watching. We hope we've cleared up a lot of the myths and common misunderstandings out there when it comes to buying upgrades for your car and tuning your car. So if if you've got any tips to pass on, let us know in the comments. We really do appreciate your feedback. Please boot that like button because that helps us to get out there. We really do appreciate that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.